She was just a few steps away from salvation. The angels had already arrived. The order had already been given. The fire was already descending from the sky. And yet, she looked back. The story of Lot's wife is one of the most impactful in the entire Bible, and also one of the most misunderstood. Most people know the ending. Lot's wife turned to salt, but almost no one stops to understand what really happened in that instant. What was going through her mind? What did that look truly mean? And why did God transform a seemingly simple gesture into a symbol that transcends millennia? Today we're going to delve deep into this story. We're going to revisit the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. We're going to get to the exact moment when everything changed, and we're going far beyond the event itself. Because there's something hidden in this narrative that most people have never noticed. A detail that completely changes how you'll see this story, and I'll only reveal that detail at the end. So stay until the end. Imagine a thriving city. Bustling streets, active commerce, people who built their lives brick by brick. Sodom wasn't an abandoned place. It was a real city, full of real stories. And that's precisely why what's about to happen is so significant. The Bible describes Sodom and Gomorrah as places deeply and irreversibly corrupted. In Genesis 18, God tells Abraham that the outcry against those cities was great, and that the evil that came out of them had reached him. It was not a frivolous accusation. It was a definitive diagnosis. Abraham, who was Lot's uncle, had an extraordinary conversation with God that day. He interceded for the cities. He asked, "What if there are 50 righteous people? What if there are 40? What if there are 10? God, in each answer, demonstrated patience and mercy. But in the end, the number of righteous people was not found. The city had passed the point of no return. This is where God's judgment on Sodom becomes inevitable. 2 angels are sent, not to save the city, but to save a specific family. The warning has arrived, but for many who lived there it came too late, and you need to understand this before continuing. What was about to happen was not impulse. It was the culmination of divine patience that had reached its limit. The fire that would descend was not blind rage, it was judgment, and there is a huge difference between the two. The 2 angels arrived in Sodom at nightfall. Lot was sitting at the city gate, an important detail because it indicates that he held a position of some respectability among the inhabitants. He saw them, stood up, bowed down with his face to the ground, and invited them into his house. Even without knowing exactly who they were, he showed them hospitality. But what happened that night revealed the level of degradation of the city. Men from Sodom surrounded Lot's house, demanding that he hand over the visitors. The account in Genesis 19 is direct and disturbing. Lot tried to negotiate, tried to protect his guests. The angels had to act. They struck the men outside with blindness. At that moment, inside a house surrounded by an angry mob, was a family. Lot, Lot's wife, 2 daughters. 2 people who would have been their sons-in-law, and who, when warned to flee, thought Lot was joking. The sacred text says they laughed. Think about it for a second. The warning of destruction came, and the response was laughter. Now imagine Lot's wife that night, hearing the commotion outside, watching her husband try to contain an angry mob, smelling the air of fear. She knew that city was her life. It was where her children had grown up, where her memories, her belongings, perhaps her closest friendships were. That house wasn't just a house, it was everything she knew. And suddenly, 2 men, angels she perhaps didn't yet fully understand, were saying, "Tomorrow, you'll have to leave everything behind." As dawn began to break, the angels were direct. "Get up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, so that you do not perish in the punishment of the city." The instruction was clear, urgent, leaving no room for interpretation. But Lot hesitated. The biblical text uses an expression that says a lot. He lingered, and it was necessary for the angels to take him by the hand and the hand of his wife and daughters and lead them out of the city. Divine mercy appears here in an almost physical way. It did not wait for Lot to take the initiative. It pulled him. Outside the city walls, the final instruction was given. Genesis 19:17 records the exact words, "Escape for your life. Do not look back nor stop anywhere in the plain." It was not a suggestion. It was a condition for survival. The instruction not to look back was not an arbitrary prohibition. In the context of the ancient world, looking back during a flight meant hesitation, and hesitation in that case meant death. But there was a much greater spiritual weight to that commandment, which we will explore shortly. What matters now is this: the order had been given, the family knew what to do, and the path ahead was open. What each of them would do with that instruction was now their own choice. They were running. The sun was beginning to rise when Lot and his family set out toward the small town of Zoar, a town Lot had asked the angels to spare and which was preserved because of him. Each step took them further away from Sodom. Each step brought them closer to something most people would never receive, a second chance. And then the sky changed. Genesis 19:24 says, "Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah. The ground must have begun to tremble. The air, which seconds before had carried the silence of dawn, was now torn by a sound that no human word can fully describe. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah was not slow. It was total, immediate, overwhelming. Behind them, an entire civilization was being consumed, and they ran without looking back. If you're watching this video right now and it's helping you learn more about the Bible in a different way, please like and subscribe to the channel. This helps many more people find this content. The miracle was happening right there. That family had been rescued from a doomed city. Angels had held their hands. The path had been opened. Salvation was in motion. But salvation in motion is not yet complete salvation, and everything was about to change in a single second. She was almost there. There's no way to know exactly at what point in the spill it happened. Whether it was at the beginning, when the flames were just starting, whether it was halfway through, when the roar of destruction was already echoing behind them, or whether it was almost at the end, when Zoar was already in sight. What the Bible records is simple, direct, and permanent. Lot's wife looked back and she became a pillar of salt. One phrase, one gesture, one destiny. She didn't return to the city. She didn't try to rescue anyone. She didn't stop for long. She just looked. And that was enough. There is no expression of cruelty in that moment in the biblical text. What there is a direct and irreversible consequence of a choice made in an instant. Theologians throughout the centuries have debated what exactly that look represented, and this debate is profound because the answer is not simple. What is clear is that that look cost everything. She had left the city. She had obeyed to a certain extent. She had run. She had left behind her home, her possessions, probably her sons-in-law, and yet something inside her couldn't completely go away. Something looked back. That's the question that has hung in the air for centuries. The Bible doesn't explain the thoughts of Lot's wife. There's no verse that says she looked because she loved the city, or she looked because she doubted God. The sacred text records the act and leaves the interpretation open, but that doesn't mean we can't carefully examine what was at stake. Think about what she was leaving behind. This wasn't a city she had visited. It was the place where she lived, where she had possibly raised her children, where she had her possessions, her relationships, her social identity. Sodom was, for her, the known world, and the known world, even when imperfect, has an enormous weight on the human heart. It may have been longing, it may have been attachment, it may have been disbelief, that inner voice that whispers, "This can't really be happening." It may have been the instinct to see with one's own eyes what the mind still refused to accept. In any of these cases, there is something profoundly human in that gaze. What makes this story so universal is precisely this. We have all looked back in some way. We have all been caught between what we are leaving behind and what lies ahead. We have all obeyed up to a point and then hesitated. Her problem wasn't that she loved what she was leaving behind. The problem was that at that moment, that love was greater than her confidence in what lay ahead. And that's a tension that every human being knows. Centuries later, Jesus directly referenced that moment. In Luke 17:32, in the midst of a teaching about the end times, he simply said, "Remember Lot's wife." 3 words. No elaboration. As if the simple act of remembering were enough to communicate everything. Why did Jesus mention her? Because in the context of that teaching, he was talking about people who, at the moment of salvation, would return to seek their possessions, their old life. And the gaze of Lot's wife was the perfect symbol of that. Looking back, in biblical language, is not merely a physical movement. It is a state of heart. It is attachment to what is left behind being greater than commitment to what lies ahead. It is nostalgia that paralyzes. It is longing that transforms into resistance. The prophet Isaiah records God saying, "Do not remember the former things, nor consider the things of old. Behold, I will do a new thing." In the biblical narrative, there is a constant tension between the past that binds and the future that liberates. Lot's wife became the eternal symbol of all who were called forward, but failed to let go of what was left behind. This is not just a story of disobedience. It's a story about the difficulty of living on the move when your heart is still anchored elsewhere. And this is a conflict that transcends time, culture, and religion. It is simply human. Why salt? This is a question many people ask, and the answer goes far beyond chemistry. In ancient Middle Eastern culture, salt had a powerful dual meaning. On one hand, it was a symbol of preservation and covenant. Agreements were sealed with salt. The book of Leviticus mentions salt as part of sacred offerings. Numbers 18:19 speaks of a covenant of salt, something permanent, unalterable. On the other hand, salt was also associated with sterility and judgment. Sowing salt on devastated land was an act of cursing. It meant that nothing would grow there again. Judges 9:45 describes this act after a battle. The salt made the soil infertile, barren, dead to any future. Lot's wife became salt, and this symbol carries both sides at the same time. She was preserved as a memory. Her image remained. The text says that she became, not that she was destroyed, but that she was transformed into something permanent, a silent witness by the wayside. But she also became barren for the future, stagnant, without movement, without growth, frozen in the instant of choice. Lot's wife's salt is both a monument and a warning, a reminder that the moment we stop moving forward can define us forever. The lesson from Lot's wife did not remain confined to the desert of the Middle East. It has spanned centuries, been quoted by Jesus, discussed by theologians, painted, sculpted, written and sung in virtually every culture that has come into contact with the Bible. Why does this story have this enduring power? Because she speaks to something that every generation faces, the cost of not letting go of the past. The Bible is full of stories of transformation that demand this movement. The people of Israel, freed from Egypt, spent 40 years in the desert in part because they kept looking back, remembering the pots of meat of slavery as if they were blessings. The Apostle Paul wrote in Philippians 3:13, "One thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead." This forgetting is not amnesia. It is an active choice not to let the past determine the future. Lot's wife didn't lose her salvation because she committed a heinous crime. She lost it because of a glance, a moment of attachment, a second in which the past was greater than faith in what lay ahead. And that's what makes this story so frightening and so relatable. It's not the grand betrayals that usually hold us captive. It's the small glances. It's the longings we cultivate in silence. It's the what-ifs that keep swirling around. It's the old versions of ourselves that we refuse to bury. The biblical story of Sodom and Gomorrah is, ultimately, also a story about freedom and about how difficult it is to truly accept that we are free to go. That's the point that bothers me the most. She wasn't destroyed with Sodom. She escaped. The angels knew her by name. or at least by the role she played in the family that was being saved. She received the warning. Her hand was held. She ran. And even so, there is a spiritual danger that theology calls near obedience, and Lot's wife is its most eloquent icon. She did almost everything right, she just didn't do the last part, and the last part was exactly what defined her. This echoes in other biblical stories. The rich young man who approached Jesus with all the right credentials, keeping the commandments since his youth, but went away sad when the cost of the final offering was presented. Ananias and Sapphira in the book of Acts, who sold their property and brought part of the money, but lied about the whole amount. Close, but not completely surrendered. The warning here isn't about perfection. No one in this narrative, not even Lot, was perfect. The warning is about the decisive moment, about the instant when the instruction is clear, the path is open, salvation is in motion, and something within us still hesitates. Because almost saved is not saved, and almost obedient is not obedient. Lot's wife was meters away from Zoar when she stopped, meters away, and that distance, which was physically small, was, spiritually, the distance between life and death. Now we've arrived at the moment I promised from the beginning. The detail that most people miss in the story of Lot's wife isn't in Genesis 19. It's in Luke 17, in Jesus' words. When he said, "Remember Lot's wife," he wasn't speaking to a group of people living in ungodly cities. He was speaking to his disciples, to people who already followed him, to people who had already responded to the call. The warning wasn't for outsiders, it was for those inside, and that changes everything. Because the question this story asks isn't, "Are you good enough to be saved?" The question is, after the call came, after the hand was extended, after you started running, what's still making you look back? It could be a relationship you know you need to let go of, a pattern of behavior you recognize as destructive, but that's too familiar to abandon. An old identity that defined who you were and that you haven't yet been able to completely let go of. It could be resentment. It could be pride. It could simply be the comfort of the familiar, even when the familiar no longer serves you. Lot's wife looked back and became a monument to the danger of living with one foot in the past and the other in the future. A monument that, according to historical accounts from ancient travelers, could be seen on the shores of the Dead Sea for centuries, a silent witness, permanent, saying without words what every generation needs to hear again. When God opens the way ahead, don't look back. Every time you read the story of Lot's wife, there's a natural tendency to look at her from the outside, to judge her, to think, "I wouldn't do that." But the deeper you delve into this narrative, the more it resembles a mirror. She wasn't evil. She was human, and her humanity is what makes this story so universal, so alive after millennia. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah is a historical event recorded in the Bible with precise geographical and narrative detail. God's judgment on those cities was real, and the salvation offered to that family was also real. What was also real, and remains real, is the lesson that this moment carries. You were created to move forward, to grow, to transform. The Bible, from beginning to end, is a narrative of movement, of people who were called to leave where they were and go towards something greater. And in almost every great biblical story, the turning point came when someone decided not to look back. If today you were in the midst of your own escape, leaving something you needed to leave behind, running towards a future you can't yet clearly see, then this story was written for you. Not to scare you, to remind you that the path ahead exists, that the hand that guided Lot out of the city is the same one available to you. But that hand points forward. If this video touched you in any way, leave a comment below telling us which part of the story impacted you the most. Share it with someone who also needs to hear this. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, now's the time. There's much more content like this coming soon. And remember the words of Jesus. Remember Lot's wife, not as a condemnation, as an invitation to not stop, to not look back, to keep going.